Everyone knows the foundation to any profitable job is a well-considered, properly prepared estimate. Mistakes can be costly, but they can and do happen. Perhaps our next speakers can help with that. Welcome to the session, Estimating Hacks, Tips and Tricks for Success. We are pleased to have joining us at EBPowerCon, John F. Wiesel, Dan Beresford, and John M. Wiesel. With decades of teaching experience among them, they will share their estimating top tips and tricks to help you level up as an estimator. And please remember, this is not a formal estimating course. With that, gentlemen, please take it away.
Good afternoon. What we're going to present to you today is our Suderman Estimating Systems Incorporated 5 Common Estimating Mistakes. We're going to review today our 1, not checking your takeoff in pricing and rushing your bid. 2, underbidding labor. 3, assuming information instead of asking. Request for information, RFI. Number 4, not being organized. No systems and poor communication. And number 5, not understanding the difference between overhead, margins, and profit. And now I'll turn it over to Dan to carry on with the next.
All righty. So the first item on our list was not checking your takeoff and pricing and rushing your bid. Material and labor are missed when the drawings, specifications, and addendums aren't reviewed in full or left out intentionally. We were recently working with an electrical contractor who missed some material because he assumed a different location for a transformer. The location of the transformer was buried deep in the mechanical specs that he hadn't read. The only reason we discovered it was because I was going through the drawing and I saw a little note referring me to the mechanical specifications. If we'd gone with what he was planning, that the transformer was just on the other side of the new wall, he would have been short 60 feet of cable and pipe from where the transformer is to where the power panel is. In a small company, that's a big enough miss that it could sink you. The next thing on our list would be site visits. Site visits help you see locations and existing conditions. They reveal things that can't be seen in drawings and specifications. For example, you're going into an older building with new equipment. Will it fit through the doorways? Even looking at a new build, get out and see the site. Get out and see where it's being built, because there you're going to see things that could affect how you run power to the job and get things up and running. You know, one of the things that John F. has frequently heard over 50 years is, if I don't leave out material, I won't get the job. Believe it or not, we still hear that on almost every course. But our question is, who pays for the material and labor if something is missed or left out? A person who doesn't read is no better than a person who can't. When you miss or give away material, you miss and give away labor. If you leave out material, how are you going to get paid for it? You know, we often hear that change orders will cover it. They won't. John F., tell about your waste recycling plant story.
Yes, so this is back in the 1990s. So for some of the younger people, that's the last century. We were quoting on a waste treatment plant in southwestern Ontario, a very large one. Came out for tender. There was about 4 of us contractors on it. We quoted it and were low. Of course, it was over budget, so they redesigned it, took out some things, adjusted some materials and that sort of thing, and they put it out for tender again. And then there was a new contractor on the job, and he actually was the guy that got the job in the end, the electrical contractor. This job was well over $1.5 million just for the electrical. But there was a reason he got the job, is he was about $250,000 low. The first time around, we quoted the job. There was a note, and there was a note in the second time around too on the drawing. On the electrical drawing, the first one is said, for site plan work, for electrical duct banks, electrical power, lighting, and so on, please go to the architectural site plan. This was a huge site, so they had one plan with all the electrical, mechanical, and civil work on it for that site. And they said the electrical contractor is responsible for any electrical work on that drawing. That work came to about $250,000. This contractor who got the job actually phoned us up when he got it. And he said, would you go to court for us? We want to have a court case on this. We're going to sue them. I said, what are you going to sue them for? He said, because that wasn't clear in the drawings. We didn't include all that electrical work on the site plan. And I said to him, I said, you know, look at the first time around, there was 4 of us on this job. We all included it. Second time around, we included it. It was clear that that note was on there. I said, you cost this industry a lot of money because we know you had to beat up the suppliers, the manufacturers to try to make up money. And I said, there's actually no way we'd go to court because all the rest of us knew what was on that drawing and we included it. You didn't read the specs and drawings, or if you did, you just ignored it, figuring you get the job and you go for an extra, which I know these people are tight and they are not going to give you any more money. Very important. Read the specs and drawings. I've gone into offices where they've told me, they said, do we really have to read all these specs and drawings? Yes, you do. Very important. Read all the specs and drawings. I know with some of our bigger jobs that we've done, they sent us the architectural, electrical, mechanical specs and drawings, and we had to sign and initial every page in the specs and every drawing and then send it back. And that made us responsible for everything that was in the architectural, electrical, mechanical, that was our part of the job to do. So it's very important. It takes time, but it's very important you read the specs and drawings.
Yeah, so underbidding labor. A key element in pricing labor is labor burden. Labor burden is what an employee costs you on top of his or her wages. So those are all the additional costs that you have to pay out to an employee per hour. John F., you had an experience with this as well too, I believe.
Yes, a lot of experiences over my years. People have called me back into their offices, and I got a call one day, and somebody had taken the course, and they said, you know, we're doing our estimating, and we use what you taught us in your labor manual, and we're actually on our jobs, we're coming out ahead in the labor, we're beating the labor, and we're buying better, but we're not making any money. Can you come and take a look and see what we're doing wrong? So I went to their office and I said, okay, let's take a look at your estimates. Let's take a look at your recap sheet, and let's take a look at what your costs are. And as soon as I went down the recap sheet, I went to the labor, and it was about $35 an hour they had in for the labor dollars. And I said, so that $35, what is that? And they said, that's the cost of our electrician. I said, that's the straight pay, what you pay him? Yes. I said, do you pay CPP? Yep. Where is that? Do you pay workman's compensation? Yep. Where is that? Do you have holiday pay? You pay him holidays? Yes. Where is that? Do you have taxes in there? Oh yeah, we have to pay taxes. Where is that? They didn't put the labor burden in. So basically that labor burden was all of their overhead on the job. They weren't making money. The jobs were coming out okay as far as job costs for labor and material, but because they didn't put the labor burden in on top of their labor hours, which I've seen more than once, people think that that labor rate is what they're paying the guys. It is not. It's their hourly wage. You have to add labor burden in.
Something else you got to look at is non-productive labor includes lost time and foreman time. So foreman production time drops for every person that's additional on their team. They have more organizing to do, and they have more paperwork to do on top of that. Missing associated labor costs, such as COVID precautions. There actually is an article in the Electrical Business Magazine, the May 2021 issue, that deals with that, with COVID impacts on the job. Also travel, safety talks, living out allowance, seasonal impacts, and geographical impacts are all things that you have to look at that are associated to your labor. You also have to look at levels of a building. How many levels are there? There's stairs. Is there a lift? Is there an elevator that can be used? That's also going to impact your labor on site for high rises and multi-story buildings. And foreman overlap. So if you have a crossover shift where you have a day, an afternoon, or an evening shift, you want to make sure that you account for that extra time that foremen are going to be overlapping for an hour at least probably each day to coordinate their work and what they have done. What happens in the event of overtime or shift work? Make sure hours are accounted for and not just regular time if you need overtime and shift work included. Who pays for the labor if something is missed or left out? When you leave out material, you leave out labor to install it.
Assuming information. Quote by plans and specification. List plans and specifications used. When you do a tender, it is always good to list the drawings and the date you receive the drawings. We've got plans back after for constructional plans that were different than the plans we quoted on. So it's very important in your tender to list the plans that you're using, that you were given, and the date you were given them. Qualify your tenders, inclusions and exclusions. A lot of tenders we got over the years, they said if you have any qualifications, your tender will not be accepted. And we had tenders that weren't accepted because we put some qualifications in. At the end of the day, we were happy that we didn't get these jobs. There were jobs that we tendered that we didn't get, that in the end of the day, we were happy we did not receive. We qualified our tenders, even if that note was in there, because a lot of times we never got our questions answered or answered properly. Sometimes the specs and the drawings were different. They didn't coordinate them properly. So we listed in there what we included and what we did not include. Ensure you have the most up-to-date plans and specifications. Dan has a very good experience on this one, and I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah. I was working in the lighting side of things, LED lighting, and we'd been asked to supply lighting for a new grocery store. So I met with the electrical contractor, picked up the drawings, asked him, is this the right set of drawings? Yeah, that's the right ones. So I take this stuff, head back to my office, sit down, work out the quote for the lighting, drop it off at his office, and get a phone call after I leave. Dan, it's the wrong one. You used the wrong drawing. All righty, back over to his shop, pick up the drawings and say, what's the difference here? And so what happened was when they'd laid out the store, they changed the location of a deli counter. So the plans I started with did not match what we were going to be doing. It meant my lights didn't match. So I reworked the lights, and as I'm sitting there going through the drawing, I discovered that at the entrance to the lobby, you come out of the store, you go into a lobby. The voltage in the store was 347 volts. The voltage in the lobby was 120. Doesn't sound like much, but when at that time, 347 volt drivers were hard to get and very expensive. So I asked the electrician, I said, can you tell me about this? I said, on this right here, it says it's 347. The line mysteriously goes through the wall and magic, boom, it's 120. My big concern is there's no transformer or anything here. Are you going to be putting one in? Fine. Because we can't hook up a 120 volt driver to 347 volts. It'll blow the lights. He said, no, it'll be fine. We'll take care of it. Oh, great. Then I said, looking at this drawing, the ceiling is in metric. I've never seen a ceiling grid laid out in metric before. Are you sure your ceiling guy is going to be putting in the grid in metric? Oh, yeah. We've worked with him before. He'll do metric. Okay, great. So I leave away, head back to the shop, put together the orders. Now, the reason it's so concerning about whether the grid is metric or imperial is it changes the actual size of the light fixture. It doesn't work out evenly. So we made metric fixtures for him. Now, I did something smart before I left. I made him initial the drawing and the note about the 347 to 120. And I made him initial that the grid was going to be metric. So I get back to the shop, put it together, get the lights built, get them delivered. About 2 weeks later, I get this phone call in a panic. Your lights are useless. You sold this garbage. They're falling out of the ceiling and they're all blown. Jump in the car, race over to the construction site, get to the lobby, grab an electrician. I said, bring a ladder and your voltage testers. He said, why do you need to test the voltage? I said, I need to know what voltage is in the ceiling. He said, it's 347. I know, I hooked it up last night. I said, it's supposed to be 120 in this lobby. Well, nobody told me that. He said, but it doesn't matter. Your lights are shit anyway. Look, they're falling out of the ceiling. I said, it's not the lights that are wrong. Get up there and measure the ceiling. He said, oh, yeah, okay. I said, it's an imperial layout. It's not metric. The lights won't fit in an imperial layout. Well, that's your fault. I said, I've got my drawing signed by your boss.
Thanks, Dan. Get alternates approved in writing. One of the big things, you get a phone call from a supplier or manufacturer. Hey, John, we're on this job and I talked to the engineer and you can carry our fixtures or our distribution. No problem. You do that and you get the job. And then you send in your shop drawings. And then you find out that, oh yeah, we told him that he could use it, but that was an alternate. We want the stuff that was spec'd on the job. You always quote the job, as we said before, as per plans and specs. And then you give your alternates and the credit for the alternates. And make sure you have that in writing. Never take something over the phone or by, I guess you take it by an email. If you have it documented, get the alternates approved in writing. Because even sometimes with alternates, they'll say, we never approved that. Oh yeah, here it is. It was approved by you, so it's an alternate. Keep accurate and documented notes. Yeah, big thing when we did it by hand, which we still do some estimates by hand, we keep notes on it. We write down our notes and we put that in as part of our tender or even part of our questions. If you're using software, most software includes an area where you can put in notes. If there is something missing, and then it'll show up right away. So keep notes, write things down, keep accurate, and document everything you do on the job or any changes. Give credits for alternates or engineered ways to save money. So you quote the job as per plans and specs. If you have alternates, you put that down as a credit or a change, and you list exactly what you're doing and what you're using. The last thing here, if you don't know or aren't sure, ask. I've had a lot of young estimators come into my office and say, John, you know, I don't understand what they're saying here in the specs or drawings. So I go out and look at them and I said, you know what? I don't understand it either. So give them a call and ask them. Well, I don't want to do that. Well, why don't you want to call them? I don't want to look foolish or stupid. And I said to him, you know, like, I'd rather look foolish or stupid than to not get that question answered and we get the job and we lose money, or because we never got that question answered, we got too much in and we don't get the job. So go and ask. Never be afraid to ask. Now, one of the problems in our industry, I see that people do not want to ask questions. It is a good thing. Ask questions, get things clarified. Architects, engineers sometimes work years on a job. If it's not clear, go and ask. As Confucius says, the man who asks a question is a fool for a minute. The man who does not ask is a fool for life.
That's a good quote. I like that quote. Not being organized, no systems, and poor communication. So you always want to set up your files the same way all the time. Every job gets its own file. You don't want to mix up jobs in the same file. And have a central file for all your work. Make sure that you set up files all the same way. So if someone else has to jump in there, they know what's going on and they can see it. Ensure everyone is working together on the same page. John F., you got an experience with that one as well?
Yes, another one from my glory days as an estimator, in charge of the estimating department in the company. And I was both electrical and mechanical, and probably the biggest job our company got at that time. I was taking care of the whole job. Plus on the electrical side, I was getting prices from suppliers and organizing that end of the job and organizing it with the generals to quote. But I also was doing the substation on the building, the main substation coming in, plus the feeder into the building and the main service. That was my part of the takeoff. And on the substation, of course, there's civil work, there's fencing, there's foundations, and there's grounding. The grounding showed up on a plot plan with the building grounding, which was a separate drawing, So this whole building had two ground grids. It had one inside the building and one outside the building. It was a very grounded building. And plus it tied into the substation grounding, and it showed the substation grounding on that drawing. So one of our other estimators, there's three of us on that job, took that part off. He wasn't in one day. I did the substation, put everything together. So I just went into his office to check, and I took a look at the drawing, and he had all the grounding checked off, including the grounding on the substation. So I assumed, right? I assumed he had it. Big mistake. We did get the job. And our project manager and foreman came to us one day and he said, look, we're going to be quite a bit short on material for grounding. It doesn't look like you picked up any of the grounding on the substation. There was about $7,000 worth of material alone at that time. So I went in his office, we took a look at it, and he said, well, I said, you checked it off? He said, I checked it off because I figured you took it. You were doing a substation that you took off the drawing. I said, well, you weren't here that day. I looked at it, so I figured you took it off. Big mistake. We didn't communicate. We didn't talk. I assumed, he assumed, we missed the grounding. It didn't cost us the company. It was a very big job, but it did cost us some money.
So as you just heard, even with the best laid plans, you can still have gaps in your scope. And what you want to do is being organized and having everything documented is to reduce those scope gaps. So you want to make sure that everyone is listed for who's responsible for what. So make a document, whether it's an Excel sheet, it's on a board, it's on a whiteboard, or it's listed on a piece of paper. Have something that lists who is responsible for what, and then follow up afterwards. Have a closing meeting with each other and make sure that all the scopes are covered off and that you don't have any scope gaps in there. Document communications with the GC, customer, and suppliers. Even if it's verbal, send an email with information that was discussed and ask for confirmation on the correspondence back to you, so that they can say, yes, we got this information and that is what we talked about. So at least you have something, whether it's an RFI or an email response, make sure you get that back. Being well organized reduces errors. Remember, any system is better than no system. Systems can be improved. We learn by our mistakes, hopefully.
So that leads us into our next one, not understanding the difference between overhead, margins, and profit. Overhead includes all the soft costs of being in business that are not associated with a specific job. It's the money you use to run your company, even without work. Margin, margin equals gross profit, which equals markup plus profit. Margin should not be confused with profit. Profit is the amount of money left over after all the job costs and overhead are paid. Profit's not a dirty word. So John M is going to go through some overhead with you.
Yeah, so overhead. Lots of companies with home offices claim that they do not have overhead expenses. Looking at this list, what do you think? We have administrative office salaries, engineering, estimating, accounting and record keeping, warehouse personnel, office, warehouse rent, telecommunications, office furniture and equipment, stationery, postage, taxes, utilities, licenses, legal expenses, advertising, insurance, office and equipment liability, vehicle expense, travel expense, and miscellaneous. We have guys where they'll say, we have a home office, we don't have any overhead expenses. Well, what about your truck? Yeah, the company pays for the truck. Okay, so that's overhead. What about your cell phone? Yeah, the company pays for the cell phone. Well, that's overhead. What about your computer equipment and your printers and the equipment that goes with it? Well, yeah, the company pays for that. Well, that's overhead too. What about the extra wear and tear on your home? What about the space that you use for office space and storage and utilities? You have extra utility costs on top of that too that you can claim. Just because you don't have commercial space doesn't mean you don't have overhead. And not knowing your overhead and making sure it is covered means you're losing money. If you can't cover your overhead, how are you going to stay in business?
And that brings us back to margin. Margin equals gross profit, which equals markup plus profit. Job costs. Well, job costs are what the job costs to do. It's all the money that you're going to lay out to do that job. So on this one, my example here, we've got job costs of $50,000. did a markup of 25%. 25% of $50,000 is $12,500. My total price that I'm bidding, total price is job cost plus markup, is $62,500. Markup divided by price equals margin. So at 12,500 markup, divide by 62.5, I've got 0.20, or a margin of 20%. The problem with this calculation is markup does not break out your overhead costs. So after doing this kind of math, the next question is, where's your profit? How much is it? And that leads us to a chat on profit. So let's look at this. Why are banks, telecommunication, and manufacturing companies in business? Why are electrical wholesalers in business? Why are you in business? To make a profit. So profit is the amount of money left over after all the job costs and overhead are paid. So my prime job costs, which is material, non-productive labor, job expenses, actual labor, etc., on this job is $50,000. Did my overhead at 20%? 20% of $50,000 is $10,000. My total net cost is my prime job cost plus my overhead. That would be $60,000 on this little job. My profit percentage is actually determined by my local market. In my example, we're going to use 5%, so that's $3,000. The price quoted equals total net cost plus profit, or $63,000. Now, here's what's going on. For about the last 10 years, we've seen companies bidding jobs at prime job cost just to get the job. How long can you keep going in business if you're losing money like that? If you can't cover your overhead, what happens? If you can't cover your expenses, what happens? Profit pays for your investment of money and time in your company. Profit allows your company to grow. And profit is not a dirty word, even though people want it to be.
Okay, Dan, on profit, I've had a few experiences over the years.
Yep.
One of the fellows early in my career I was talking to, he was a contractor, and he looked like sometimes he was a homeless person, and he drove this old beat up pickup truck. So I asked him, I said, like, why do you go like that when you visit a customer? He says, I don't want to look like I'm making a lot of money, because they think that my prices are over. So I want to look like I'm not making money. And I said, okay, that's, I guess, way of looking at it. Later on, talking to another contractor, a few years later, he actually came to our office in a 3-piece suit and a big Lincoln Continental. And I said, oh, you must be doing good. He said, John, he said, when you come to a customer, you got to show them that you're in business and that you're making money. Because when you show them that you're making money and you're in business, they know you're going to be in business for a while. So 2 different ways of looking at it. The first guy never had a very big business at all. And pretty well when he retired, his business was the same size it was when it started, never really grew, never really became anything. Second guy became a very big contractor. Different ways of looking at profit. Like Dan said, profit is not a dirty word. It is something you need to make to run your company. I've had young people come in and say, John, the company's making all this money. Well, they were looking at the total net cost and overhead, and they said, oh, you're making, like on that one, 10,000, you're making $13,000. No, you're not making $13,000. There's not $13,000 profit. 10,000 of it is what we pay you, and for your office, and for your desk, and for my stuff, and for this whole company. That is the cost to run this business. That is not profit. What our boss wants to see at the end of the day, he wants to see that $3,000 plus probably another 2 or 3. Because if we're only giving him 5% profit, he's probably going to pack the company in and close the doors. It's not enough money for his investment into this company.
Well said, all 3 of you. And hopefully with some of these tips and tricks and stories you've shared, gentlemen, people watching this will pay greater attention to getting to that finish line of decent profit and being able to expand and grow and understanding that profit is not a dirty word. And with that, gentlemen, thank you very much, John F., Dan, and John M., for taking the time to share these top tips and tricks so as to help people level up their estimating capabilities. Thanks again for joining me at EBPowerCon.
Yes, thank you,
Our
Anthony.
pleasure.
Yes.